Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and we are going to jump into an episode of What Do You Want to Know Wednesday podcast style, answering your questions for this January 2026 episode, which is crazy to say. But before we do that, I want to highlight our podcast sponsor, Voetberg Music Academy. Voetberg Music Academy gives you the opportunity for all of the students in your home that want to learn anything from ukulele to mandolin to guitar, fiddle, piano, to learn together under one account for as little as $30 a month using my code MS4Mama20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled. My son Theo recently started their lessons in guitar and is loving them. And it's an easy way to skip the snow and the ice and the mess on the roads and instead to learn from home in a way that motivates your students to keep going and keep learning new songs. If you are looking for lessons for your students and would like to not pay hundreds of dollars a month for each of them, you can use the code MS4Mama20 for 20% off each month that they're enrolled at VoetbergMusicAcademy.com. Okay, so we're going to dive in with a very relevant to me question, and that is, how do you deal with a whiny/grumpy preschooler? Don't know what to do anymore. My current 5-year-olds who will be in school this fall, so, well, they'll be learning. They're already learning in life, but they will be at our homeschool co-op and they'll be officially doing lessons with me this fall, are in a very whiny stage. So what do? I do a lot of redirecting. I do a lot of reminding them. I do a lot of outright saying, nope, say it again, but in a different tone of voice. And I do a lot of letting them know that whining does not get them what they want. So, does that instantly fix kind of this stage where they have gotten into a habit of speaking in a sing-song, whiny way, or saying, but I want it, or things like that, that kind of make every parent's flesh crawl a little bit? No, it's not an instant fix, but that consistency and that perseverance in giving them opportunities to try again, to practice, as soon as you see it coming, say, nope, I am not going to let you say it that way. I can tell it's about to come out whiny. Be reminded that we say things in a respectful and kind and honoring way to others. And you can tell them, and that looks like this. Now, sometimes there's going to be insistent whining that leads to a consequence, like a loss of a privilege. This happened with my 7-year-old just the other night when he was wanting to have a cookie. Now, he's not a preschooler. And so when I say that it's not an instant fix, I really do mean that. Even though he's made great strides and I say 7, he will be 7 very, very soon, but he's just on this side of 7. So he's 6 still, but so he has plenty of time to practice, but yeah, it is frustrating, especially as a homeschool mom. I will say that because I'm with them all day, and most homeschool moms can relate, that whining really particularly drags on you because you're encountering it a lot. So being very proactive to model kind speech and to set those boundaries, to apply consequences if needed, to remind. It's hard and it's tedious, but it's helpful. So my 7-year-old, almost 7-year-old, just the other day was wanting a cookie before bed, but he wasn't helping clean up. And it was a little bit past his bedtime. So I told him, you can have a cookie in your lunch tomorrow at homeschool co-op, but you're not getting one tonight because 1, it's past your bedtime and you need to go brush your teeth, and you can't, eat a cookie after you've brushed your teeth. 2, everybody down here was cleaning up and you weren't participating. So you have dragged past your bedtime without actually doing what you were supposed to be doing. And, and the cookies were like coming out of the oven, so they weren't ready yet. So past your bedtime, you weren't doing the things you knew you were supposed to be doing. And so that means you'll get a cookie in your lunch tomorrow instead of tonight. Hardly a consequence, more just like a shift in timing. But he really wanted that cookie right then, and he wanted to be able to stay up 10 minutes later to have it. And so he used a whiny voice to let me know that he wanted it then. And I gave him some opportunity to correct his tone that he did not avail himself of. And so he lost the cookie altogether. Now, it doesn't mean he'll never have a cookie again or anything like that. It just means that that opportunity to have a cookie was gone because he couldn't interact respectfully when he asked for it. So I give that as a very concrete example because people love concrete examples. I don't often give concrete examples of consequences because I think it is the parent's responsibility to pay attention to when it is necessary to give consequences as opposed to modeling and reminding. And what kind of consequences are actually effective? What kind of discipline or discipling is actually effective for an individual child? So one of the questions that I have for today's What Do You Want to Know Wednesday is give me a list of concrete consequences that go with specific misbehaviors. And I'm not going to do it because, and I've said this many times before on multiple episodes in my books, the consequence for a child, for example, this is just an easy example that comes to mind. The consequence for a child who loves to read and chooses to read instead of do his chores or his homework would obviously be that he needs to have his reading time curtailed while he instead does his other responsibilities. One of the phrases that we often use in our home is responsibilities before privileges. Reading can be a responsibility if it's assigned for school or if it's a learning, the purpose of it is to learn something. But it is a privilege in the sense that, I remember very distinctly lying on my stomach on my bed, reading for hours and my mom calling for me and my thinking, if I just lie here really still and keep reading, maybe she'll forget that she called me. And sometimes that's how it worked out. And that was really not a good thing for me. That taught me laziness. And so when we are faithful to say, hey, you made the choice to keep doing the thing that you wanted to do, in this case, reading, instead of the thing that you needed to do, reading's not bad. I'm happy that you love to read, but you're not going to be able to spend 2 hours reading today. Instead, I need you to come help me clean windows or load the dishwasher or mop the floors or whatever chore is needing to be done. Because while chores as a form of discipline can be a highly debated topic, I personally see them as a really great way to reset our children's mindsets. One, they live here and they contribute to the mess. And it only makes sense that they contribute to the care of the home and that they learn life skills in the process. I think Justin Early is someone, he wrote Habits of the Household. I think he's someone that really advocates for chores as a form of discipline or consequence, not because you want to teach a child to hate chores, but because children naturally don't want to do things that are kind of no fun, right? Kids chase fun. Adults do too, in our own way. And so if they're already considering the chore something that they would like to avoid, saying, no, I'm sorry, but you definitely have to do this is a great way of both teaching them something useful and giving them work ethic and teaching them self-discipline, but also saying, we're doing this instead of that. We're not just going to do the thing that you love to do. So circling back around to why I'm not going to give a case by case for this infraction, this consequence, is because if you were to say to a child who doesn't like to read, you can't read for an hour today, or at least you're not allowed to read until you do X, Y, or Z, he'd be like, I didn't want to read anyway, man. So that may be a silly example in the sense that, duh, Abbie, you wouldn't take away something or give somebody a chore that they absolutely love to do. For example, if you've got a child who loves organizing things and organizes things for fun voluntarily, that might not be the chore to give them as a form of discipline if they've skipped out on another chore that they find repugnant. So common sense, prayer, discussing it with your spouse, asking an in-person mentor who actually knows your kids if she's noticed an effective way of helping your child learn a lesson. Those are all really great ways of getting out of that rut of thinking, I just don't have any natural consequences that pop to mind. Because I will tell you this, not every poor choice on our kids' parts, one, requires a consequence. Sometimes it's better to have a conversation. Sometimes it's better to remind. And other times that consequence is definitely necessary. And it's our job as parents to seek the Lord for wisdom in the nuance of when to do what. But also when that consequence is necessary, and that's really evident, going down a list and saying, you did this, and therefore this is going to happen to you every single time, is often a recipe for rebellion, because you've got a kid who doesn't feel like you actually know them or see them or care about them as an individual. They're just, a factor that you plug into an equation. And also, this is what I started to say earlier, not every poor choice on our kids' parts has a natural consequence. So there's not always going to be a perfect correlation between point A and point B. Sometimes you simply have to say, this is what's happening because I know it's a pain point for you, and I want it to be a lesson learned to help you remember this was not your favorite experience. Just like it talks about in Hebrews 12, it says in Hebrews 12:7, it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? And of course, this means what son or what daughter. If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, this is a foregone conclusion in Scripture, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them. And I love that phrase, as it seemed best to them. Part of that as it seeming best to them has to do with the prayer, the seeking of wisdom, the studying your kids, the using common sense, the individualization of parenting for each child. But he disciplines us for our good. This is referring to God, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful. In other words, if you give a consequence and your child laughs about it because it doesn't bother him, it's the wrong consequence. I can tell you that. But later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. This is so key to those who have been trained by it. So I said I wasn't going to answer that question with a list of do's and don'ts, and I'm not. But I do want to encourage you that it's not something to outsource, that it's not something to try to find a spreadsheet to plug into, but instead it's something to really, really take seriously. I mean, that paragraph makes it very clear that part of our holiness is not being able to do whatever we want with zero consequences, and that the consequences need to be something that we don't enjoy. So circling way back around the original question that I piggybacked off of with that conversation about discipline and a whiny child, it needs to be that your goal is to help your children understand the heart of why whininess is disrespectful and dishonoring to others, why it's a source of frustration and it's not a blessing. And we are teaching our kids, hopefully, to be a blessing. So whether that's, again, through discipline or consequences, whether that's through modeling, whether that's through giving them opportunities or requiring them to take the opportunity to try again and alter their tone, just know that while there's probably not an immediate, I'm going to get them to never whine again with this one little trick, it is something to persevere through, because that child will eventually get it. And once they do, that will completely alter the way they communicate with people for the better. And that's what we want. We want to invest in the areas that matter so that the result is something that benefits our child, honors God, and blesses others. Speaking of piggybacking off of a topic, this wasn't a question that was submitted for this specific What Do You Want to Know Wednesday for a podcast edition, but it's one that I've been asked a couple of times recently, and it's a comment that I had on one of the podcast videos. I don't remember what platform it was on, maybe Spotify or maybe YouTube. And it was someone that was essentially saying that teaching our children to do things because they're a blessing to others, that motto that we have in our family, be a blessing, is something that would only produce people pleasers who do things for the favor of man and not because it honors God. That's actually not quite how they put it. It was just saying basically that they were going to be people pleasers and that they were going to constantly try to alter their behavior to make people like them. And so I wanted to be really clear, and I think I might do an entire episode on the whole motto of be a blessing, because I think I could break it down for at least 20 minutes. But the short answer to that is there is a huge difference between doing what Philippians 3 and 4 reminds us to do, is just to look not only to our own needs, but to the needs of others. And in humility, consider others more important than ourselves. And that the example is that of Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the nature of a servant and humbled himself to the point of death on a cross. That wasn't people pleasing. That was honoring his Father in heaven. But he did it to honor God and then for our sake. And when we have that as our model, it's never about trying to make someone like us, but instead it's more about looking outside ourselves and noticing others and their needs in ways that we can bring joy to their lives, in ways that we can enrich their lives practically and be generous and kind. It's looking at someone who is sitting alone and going over and sitting beside them and asking how their day is. It's opening a door when you have a lot of things in your hand, but you could transfer them to one hand and get a hand free and open it for someone who has no hands free and they're about to have to set a box down and open the door and then try to hustle the box through, or a mom that's pushing a stroller and has little kids. I want my children to not do that because they want the mom to like them, which would be a form of people pleasing, but to want to do that because they are focused outwardly with the eyes on their face, but the eyes of their heart to see a way to be the hands and feet of Jesus, because that's what we're called to do by Scripture. We're called to love God and love people. So my short answer to is encouraging your kids to be a blessing, just raising up a tribe of people pleasers, is no, it is not. If you were encouraging them to make sure that their behavior is always palatable in a cultural way, in other words, don't buck the culture, don't ever seem weird, make sure you don't get people upset with you. No, that's not the same thing. In fact, sometimes when we're a blessing to people, it's because we speak the truth to them in love, even when they don't want to hear it. And they might not like us for it, but in the end, just like it talked about in Hebrews 12, the result, if they're willing to be trained up by the truth, is that there's a harvest of righteousness. That is a blessing. Okay, here's another question. This is from a homeschool mom who says that she wants to homeschool, but the co-op is an hour away. So you do not need to have a co-op to homeschool. I was homeschooled and we didn't have a co-op. I've talked about this before on another What Do You Want to Know Wednesday, so I'll do this briefly, but we essentially had a co-op once a month, maybe, where all the crunchy granola 90s homeschool moms would get their health food order from the big truck that pulled up to the park and we ran around and played. That was our co-op. There was no formal learning happening. It was a very fun experience, and the moms got a little bit of socializing, and so did we, and we got our food and we went home. That's what we called a co-op at that point. This idea that you can't homeschool without a co-op is a very, very new one. I would say even in the last couple of years that this has become more of a mindset since 2020, and homeschooling co-ops and more formal learning kind of centers that help homeschool parents have exploded as a result of the pandemic. And so I just want to debunk that idea. And also, if you're going once a week and it is an hour away and you really do want to homeschool co-op, that's something that's essential to you in your mind, or important to you, an hour is not that bad. I definitely know people that drove much longer than an hour to get to our homeschool co-op that we go to, and it was worth it to them to do it for one day a week. So that would be up to you to decide whether that is beneficial for your family or not. But I just want to encourage you that having school at home, spending time in nature, reading good books, making recipes together, going to church, volunteering in your community, going to the park, those are all completely adequate and sufficient elements of homeschooling that do not need co-op tacked onto them. We love our co-op and I'm grateful that we have it, but I do not think that it is necessary for us to be able to homeschool. Okay, here's another good one. And this is something that I hear about a lot, especially considering ADHD self-diagnoses are like really, really high right now. It's really, really popular on social media to suddenly discover that you are ADHD or have ADHD or have those tendencies. And so this question says, how to handle mom ADHD, quote unquote. Is multitasking more harm than good, or is it how we survive? I think it depends on the type of multitasking. And I can only answer this for me personally, but at the same time, I have anecdotal evidence from friends who agree. And I think there's even studies out there who support the fact that if your multitasking involves screens where you're trying to watch, little clips of videos, but also listen to your child read, but also load the laundry, your brain is going to get fried. It's not made to have that much sensory input in that particular way. However, The multitasking where you are bouncing the baby on your hip while making oatmeal at the stove and doing times tables with your 8-year-old, that's great. I mean, I really think that the Lord has made women's brains to juggle a lot of things at once on purpose because he knew we were going to have to. So my suggestion or my kind of exhortation to you would be to pay attention to the kind of multitasking that makes you feel frazzled and fried and pulled in so many different directions that you can't focus. And then maybe pay attention to the ones where you feel like you can still be present while doing several things at once. Now, keep in mind, just like I talked about recently in an episode on capacity, one, that analysis, that self-analysis that I just encouraged you to do may change from season to season. There may be seasons when you feel like you can't focus on more than one thing at all. And you're just going to have to sit with your toddler and read the books to them. And I mean, I'm not sure what else you're going to do while you're reading to your toddler. That would be difficult to multitask, but you're going to have to just do the laundry, and you're not even going to be able to have an audiobook in your ear because it's overstimulating, and you realize you can't remember whether you put the laundry soap in before you turned it on. There are going to be seasons like that. And then there are going to be other seasons, and I know this from personal experience, that you can voice memo your best friend while you're in the shower. Remember to put the shampoo and the soap in your hair, and then, make yourself a to-do list while you're drying your hair. And you have the capacity for both. So I'm kind of torn on this one because I personally find that when I'm forcing multitasking to look like a frantic circus, then it usually doesn't go too well. And I end up feeling like I didn't do any one thing well at all. And then there are other times where I find complementary activities. One of the biggest ones I always talk about, which is kind of not me multitasking, but it's maybe habit stacking, is to read aloud to my kids while they fold laundry. I had someone say, how in the world do you fold laundry and read aloud at the same time? Which I suppose if you laid your book out on a stand and folded laundry that you weren't looking at and read with your eyes to the book, you could technically do that, but that's definitely not what I'm doing. So there's a really interesting concept. Like, what's the difference between multitasking, where you personally are doing lots of different things at once, and habit stacking, where maybe you are making sure that complementary activities are happening at the same time so that you have your kids engaged and yourself engaged and you're accomplishing multiple things at once without it being a huge stress. That's an interesting thought, because I don't know for sure that I have the answer to what the exact difference is or whether one is more beneficial than the other. But I do know that I can tell when I have reached my limit and I'm not doing the multitasking thing well, even if it feels necessary. And the biggest way to tell that that is the case is when I start snapping at my kids, where my brain just feels like it is overstuffed and overflowing, and I'm frustrated with my kids for interrupting my fragmented train of thought. And that's a good moment to sit down and dump my thoughts on a paper and say, okay, I'm not getting to any one of these completely. So what are the priorities? Okay, top 3 things I really actually have to get done today. When would I actually do them? And does that need to be during nap time? Do I need to save that thing for in the car where I can listen to that voice memo and actually pay attention and then answer at some other point? Do I need to place a grocery delivery order instead of try to go to the grocery store so that I don't have one more thing to try to stack in my list? And it's going to be different for each person, but those are the kind of questions I ask myself when I'm feeling particularly frazzled, because to some extent, I love getting more than one thing done at the same time, but I also can acknowledge when it's gone too far. So hopefully that's helpful for helping you guys determine or discern what that balance is. Okay, this is another question that I get asked a lot, and it's about pregnancy after loss and struggling to trust the Lord because you're scared and you're worried and you feel like you might go through that heartache again, and you might. I can't guarantee you won't. I do feel like the main question I'm asked about that is, what is the formula for doing this? No one actually says that, but they ask me how I personally handle the concept of getting pregnant again after 3 miscarriages and no live births in between the twinbies and now. Um, and I always find myself a little resistant to that, not because it isn't a legitimate question to ask. I understand why they would ask, but because my approach may not be somebody else's approach. So I'm always going to go back to the principles, of course. One, in Matthew 6, we're told not to worry about tomorrow because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. When people are really struggling with whether or not to get pregnant again because something bad could happen again, I can't tell you that it won't and that it can't. I'd be a liar. And I don't know the future. Only God does. But I can tell you that that is borrowing trouble from tomorrow, and that our mindset and our stress greatly affects everything in our bodies, including our fertility. And holding too tightly to that understandable worry can actually cause problems in our bodies, can cause problems in our hormones. So my encouragement would be to ask the Lord to give you peace, to trust him. You go back to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. That doesn't mean your straight paths will lead to the outcome that you want them to, guaranteed. But at least you can recognize who is straightening those paths. The Lord is. He's in control. Regardless of whether the outcome is what we desire, we can say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Right there with Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Finding a way to recognize that in his sovereignty, God is good regardless of our circumstances is so hard for everyone. I don't know anyone who's like, wow, that's a snap. That's a super easy thing to do. I have no trouble with that whatsoever. Probably that just means their life has gone exactly how they wanted it to, and they've never actually had to confront this. But I think it's particularly hard when you're talking about a desire for a child, or for going through the physical and emotional and spiritual, honestly, pain and grief of losing a child, especially when it happens multiple times. So I don't have a pat answer for you. I do have principles to lean on, and that is that the Lord is working everything for our good for those who love him and are called to according to his purpose, that he who began a good work in us will bring it to completion in the day of Christ Jesus, that he is with us even to the end of the age, that he is near the brokenhearted, that he binds up our wounds and carries our tears in a bottle, that our names are graven on his palms, that he is a God of love, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness, that he holds the whole world in the palm of his hand and he spoke it into existence, which means he has not forgotten about the details of our lives. And when we take everything to him faithfully in prayer and supplication, and knowing that the Holy Spirit he is advocating for us in ways that we can't even understand, to know that we have the power of the living God inside of us fighting for us, even when our physical circumstances don't look like we would like them to. Sometimes that alone can reset our minds to praise you, Lord, that you're giving me what I need, even if it's not what I want. And trusting that though our bodies may not be completely healed this side of heaven, that one day we will have a new body. We have a whole episode, my pastor and I do, on what happens to miscarried babies or infants when they die. And I genuinely believe they are with their Savior. And I don't know what that looks like as far as being reunited with them, or whether we will recognize them or what they look like. I don't have any biblical answer for that exactly, but I do hold the hope of heaven in my heart. And that is a huge comfort to me, after having gone through miscarriages myself. So I know the answer is going to be different for each person, but I hope that that can at least calm your heart and give you some direction for prayer and for consideration for those of you that are also walking this path, which none of us wants to be in this club, but I am grateful to be able to encourage and be encouraged by those who are sadly in it with me. Okay, I'm going to just answer one more because I do have to run out the door to get my kids from homeschool co-op. And it was a real quick one. We'll see if I do any quick answers. No, I don't. But this one is about tips for teaching kids not to all talk or scream at the same time. This kind of sounds to me like it's very young children. I hope it's not 11-year-olds screaming, but or 18-year-olds, but who knows? So one thing that we've done is, and this is to do with interrupting, but a lot of times if they're talking at the same time, it's because they're trying to get your attention at the same time, in which case they're probably interrupting one of their siblings or somebody else, is we will teach our kids to place their hands on our arms, and wait until we can give them our attention. Especially with young children, you don't want to make them wait a long time. They didn't come with the long attention span mode activated, and it's not going to be activated for a while. So it's important that you don't just stand there, finishing a really long conversation while your toddler yanks on your arm, because at that point you're going to get frustrated that your arm is being yanked on and have to deal with that as a disciplinary issue. And so kind of set yourself up for success if you have something like this you put in place. So put your hand on my arm, and in just a couple seconds, I will be able to get to you. Or I will say, I actually can't get to you quickly right now. You're going to have to wait just a minute. And I haven't forgotten about you though. Making that eye contact and letting them know that they're seen. Like, hey, I still see you. I'm going to talk to you in just a second. And I will just actively say, I mean, y'all, I will just tell you, I literally say, stop talking. Your brother was already talking to me. So stop talking for right now because I can't process what you're saying, and sit right there, right beside me so I don't forget about you. And I will talk to you in just a second. But then actually do what you say, because if you say you're going to help them in a few seconds and really it's like 7 minutes later because you get so into this conversation that you completely blow them off, then you've lost credibility. And believe me, I have done this before. So I've had to apologize to my kids and be like, I'm so sorry. I got distracted. And there's grace for that. But, in general, try to do what you say you're going to do and get to them as quickly as possible. And then I have this whole chapter in MS for Mama called Bootcamp Parenting, where we talk about focusing on a particular behavior that's problematic in a way that helps to untangle it pretty quickly. And there are certain behaviors that are pretty easy to address. Give your kids clear expectations. Hey, when we come in the house, for us, like today, when we come in the house after homeschool co-op, if I notice all of my kids are really loud coming in the door, I'm going to stop everyone at once and be like, hey, it is really loud in here. If you need to run off some energy, go outside, which right now it's nice outside for us, so I can do that. You could say go in the living room or go sit and draw at the kitchen table. Kind of have a plan for them to help them to harness that energy if it's just nervous energy or pent up energy that they're running off with their mouth. But go do something else for right now, or take a deep breath, or go get a drink of water. And then if you need to tell me something, come tell me, and I'll talk to you in order, of the person that came and talked to me. Then you can implement some of the things I'm talking about with interrupting or waiting or learning to be patient. But if everybody's just talking to talk, I have no problem with being like, hey, everybody zip it up for a moment. Listen to me. Here's the parameters. You can talk in a normal tone of voice, but if everybody's talking at once and it's crazy in here, we're going to have to spread out a little bit, or somebody's going to have to take turns, or you're going to need to do this activity while he finishes talking. And it's your job as their mom. Like, don't feel at all weird about being like, you get to talk and you don't, because sometimes you, as the mom, you just know what the priority is. So I've got a 9-year-old that loves to tell stories, and his stories are the cutest. But he talks 90 miles a second, hardly takes a breath. It's at the top of his voice, and he's like laughing the whole time he's telling the story because he has this joyful personality. It's precious, but at the same time, it's really loud. So sometimes I just have to say, hey, I love your story, but I can't hear anything your sister is telling me about what she needs to do for school. So either take it somewhere else or finish it up, or hold on just a second and then you can resume the story. That's okay. As the mom, that's kind of under your purview of using your judgment and your common sense to see what will create more peace in your home. Because what you don't need is feeling like, I should never tell anybody when they should stop talking, and I don't know who to prioritize, to the point that it's so loud and chaotic that you lose your cool, and then you're yelling at people to be quiet instead of calmly telling them, hey, here's the rules of engagement. Here's what we're going to do. This is what I need from you. So hopefully that helps. And I'm going to run out the door and grab my kids. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you next week. If you enjoyed the M's for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.